Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ave Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. In this webinar, Msgr. Stephen Rossetti will present the results of a broad-based survey of U.S. priests. My name is Erin Pierce. I am the Ministry Resources and Special Initiatives Manager at Ave Maria Press. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions may be sent to our presenter using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, and I'll read as many of those as possible at the end of the presentation today. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you tomorrow via email. With that, I would like to welcome and introduce our presenter today. Msgr. Stephen J. Rossetti, a priest of the Diocese of Syracuse, is an expert on priestly spirituality and wellness issues. He is a Catholic author, speaker, educator, psychologist, and retreat leader. He served for many years at St. Luke Institute in Maryland, rising to president and CEO. A graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, Rossetti earned a doctorate in psychology from Boston College and a Doctor of Ministry degree from the Catholic University of America. Rossetti is the author or editor of 12 books, including Born of the Eucharist, Letters to My Brothers, The Joy of Priesthood, The Priestly Blessing, and his newest book, Priesthood in a Time of Crisis. He serves as Research Associate Professor of Pastoral Studies at the Catholic University and is President of St. Michael Center for Spiritual Renewal. Msgr, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Erin. It's great to be with you and all of our friends who are listening.
Wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and make you presenter.
Terrific. Okay.
Okay.
My screen.
I see your screen. You can take it from here.
Okay, thanks. Well, welcome to all. It's great to be with you. As Erin mentioned, we're talking about priestly wellness, their psychological and spiritual wellness in a time of crisis. That is, I did this study in the midst of the pandemic and also the wake of the child abuse crisis. So it's kind of interesting that it's not just a normal wellness study, it's looking at that in a time of stress, and we'll see how the stress affects it or doesn't affect it. Let's begin with this reading from Scripture. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses taste, with what can it be seasoned? It is no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city set on a mountain cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and then put it under a bushel basket. It is set on a lampstand where it gives light to all in the house. Just so your light must shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your heavenly Father. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we ask you to send your Spirit as we move through this Easter season. May we be inspired, unified, animated by your Spirit as church, preaching your good news, announcing your joy and peace. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. So, as Erin mentioned, the book just came out about 2 weeks ago, so kind of excited about this. It's really the third in the series. I wrote The Joy of Priesthood, Why Priests Are Happy, and this one. They're all a series of studies of wellness and the spiritual life of priests. So now I want to just give a snapshot of what's going on in the crisis. We can actually see a development over these last 19 years. And so we'll see a trajectory, which surveys normally don't give you. They give you a snapshot, but when you do 3 in a row, you can watch trends and you'll see some of the important trends. So one of the basic research questions was how the crises, the abuse crisis and the pandemic, affecting our wellness as clergy in the U.S. The study, again, like the first 2 studies, almost 2,000 priests, 25 dioceses, so it's a large study. That's a lot of people, almost 2,000. And no bore you with the demographics, but just to show that it should be representative of priests. The response rate was 57%, so which is very good. The mean age was about 60, and you look at some diocesan, some religious, and they're born from in different nations. So hopefully it'll be fairly representative of the priests in the United States, both diocesan and religious. Again, we're comparing this to studies done in 2004 and 2009, very similar, 2000-ish, 1 to 2,000 people in the study. Well, one of the first things, if you want to know how things affect people, you ask them. I mean, a lot of people, when it comes to clergy, people are always saying, well, priests feel this way or priests feel that way. And I say, ask them. I mean, well, ask them first and ask them how they're feeling. They're very honest. I found that one thing about priests is they're very honest. So I asked them, has the abuse crisis affected 3 different things? Your faith, your view of priesthood, your view of church leadership. Not surprising the results. The one on the bottom, did it negatively impact your faith? So the sexual abuse crisis, has it impacted your personal faith? And only about 8% would say yes. So in reality, I mean, obviously 8% is 8%, but in reality, the vast majority of priests make a distinction between the abuse crisis and our faith. So it's not really impacting in a huge way a priest's faith. Their view of priesthood, there's a little bit more. Agree and strongly agree, that'd be about 29%. So but almost 1/3 of priests would say, it's kind of damaged my perspective of priesthood, which is not insignificant. And then, but the real one, of course, is did it negatively impact my view of church leadership? And you've got 56% would agree or strongly agree, which is more than half. And this is not a big surprise. The abuse crisis were focused on bishops primarily. And so you can see that it has really negatively impacted priests' view of bishops and the church leadership. But not surprising. But when you ask priests about their relationship with their bishop, you find out that actually it's not that bad. I have a good relationship with my bishop. You've got 74% would agree or strongly agree. 74%. I support my bishop's leadership. You got 80%. So I got 75 to 80% of priests would have a solid relationship with their own bishops. This reminds me of when people talk about lawyers. They say, do you like lawyers? Everybody goes, no, I hate lawyers, But I said, but do you like your lawyer? I say, well, I like my lawyer. And this is almost the same thing. Do you like bishops? No, boo, we don't like bishops. But do you like your bishop? Oh yeah, well, I like my bishop. And which is interesting. And the approval rating, about 75 to 80%, is actually very high for leaders. If you compare them to other studies of satisfaction with one's boss or leader, you're going to find that it goes from about 50 to 75%. So bishops would be in the upper ranks of that. So actually, they test out very well compared to other leaders. But it's not 100%, of course. And it's more difficult, as bishops know, to be a leader these days when you've got the liberals, you got the conservatives, and it's so hard to please everyone, in fact, that you can. So their support is strong as in general, and actually it's increasing, or in this case, it's increasing over the last maybe 30 years, but in the last 20 years, even in the midst of the crisis, it hasn't dropped. See, this is the 2009 studies. They're about the same, almost exactly the same numbers. So the abuse crisis, while negatively affecting one's perspective of bishops and leaders in the church, has been damaged. It has not apparently damaged their relationship with their particular bishop. And that's a personal relationship. And that's why bishops need to continue to meet and connect with their own priest directly, because that personal connection is so important, and most of them appear to be doing it. Now, another question of another stereotype of priesthood today is, and this is from the Hartford Current in my first study. In the wake of one scandal after another, the image of a genial, saintly cleric is given way to that of a lonely, dispirited figure living an unhealthy life that breeds sexual deviation. And that surprised the number of people who actually believe that. I mean, you talk to young men who go into the seminary today, and people say, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? There must be something wrong with you. You know, and why would you want to become a priest? It's a lonely, unhappy life, and all these priests are messed up psychologically. And by the way, obviously that's a huge change from the 1950s. You know, right after the war, the big war, WW2, the image of priesthood, you see these in the popular movies, Bells of St. Mary and Going My Way, that sort of thing. You would see the, you know, Father O'Reilly, whatever it is, these sort of happy, you know, otherworldly types of figures, going from that to this modern perspective of priests being unhealthy and dysfunctional. And the question comes, is it true? Well, you know, is it true? Are they psychological dysfunctional as a group? A lot of people would say that's true, and a lot of priests would say that actually. So I think what you need to do is you got to give them a standard psychological test. You've got to give them a test that, and then you can compare the results with their lay counterparts. So when you get psychological, like for example, I worked with priests with problems for 30 years, and I did that every day. And you say to yourself, well, look at all these priests with problems. Well, I mean, is it worse or is it better than the general population? Well, give them a standardized test. I did that. This is the third time I've done that. In this case, I gave them the BSI, the Basic Symptom Inventory 18, pathology scale, somatization, depression, anxiety, and combined the three to a global severity. The idea behind this is that 80% of mental health referrals in public mental health organizations are related to anxiety and depression. So it's a good basic measure of mental health, anxiety and depression. And these numbers, by the way, are not percentages, they're T-scores. A T-score, the mean is 50. So what you see here on the right column is the general population of males in the US, lay people, they got 50 obviously, but what did the priests get? Well, what you see here is they pretty much got the same scores. You know, 49, 50, 52, that's all basically the same. It's not a big difference until it gets to be about 13 points. So if it's 63 or 37, then that's a huge difference. So again, what you're seeing here is that the priest's mental health, which is the second time I've done this study, is about very similar to the lay counterparts. So frankly, those priests who are listening, we're just about as screwed up as our lay counterparts. You know, it's kind of like saying, well, look, you got about 10% of priests, more or less, who have alcohol problems. You know, well, is that good or bad? Of course, one case is one too many, but comparatively speaking, the laity have the same kinds of problems. So the same thing here in 2009, the numbers are about the same. So what it looks like is that the mental health of priests is very similar to lay counterparts. Although, one interesting thing about this one, especially the previous one, this was given to them during the pandemic. Now, you remember the CDC said that rates of depression and anxiety just about tripled among the general population of the laity in the US during the pandemic, understandably so. I mean, mental health people were buried in referrals. But the priest ones actually did not do that. The depression, if you ferret out the numbers, the depression rate among priests was about 7%. So when I look at this, the clinically significant scores, look at this BSI depression scale, it's now 14%. Back in 2009, it was 7%. So what that suggests is that about 7% of priests were depressed in 2009, and that doubled to 14% in 2021, which is quite a jump. But compared to the laity, it was a lot less, actually. Anxiety went from about 6% to about 9%. Again, a much less of an increase in the general population. That suggests, by the way, that priests as a group are resilient, very resilient in times of stress. And it's going to be important for us to look at what makes for a resilient priest. And of course, I think when you look at that, you'll see that makes for resilience for anyone. I mean, we're all human beings. So what makes for resilience in priesthood will be the same for the lady. So we're going to take a look at that. So about what you've got about 9 to 14% of priests would be clinically suffering from some diagnosable anxiety depressive symptoms, which is not insignificant, and that's something that keeps the vicars for clergy busy. And actually seminaries, you got lots of seminaries with difficulties. But the good news is that anxiety and depression as a group are very treatable. Well over 80% can be successfully treated with a combination of medications and therapy. So I would say let's help identify that 10%, that 12% of priests who have clinical problems and get them some treatment. Now the good news is I asked them how many of them have been through treatment, and about 40% of priests would say they've been in some form of mental health treatment during their priesthood. So I think they're getting it. I think most of the guys who need it are getting it, but not all, but many of them are. And I would say today in the U.S., most dioceses are very good about making sure guys get treatment if they need it. This is an interesting sidelight. There's one question in the BSI 18 that asks them about suicidality. Now, very few priests scored on the suicidal question, but a few did. Of the 1,942, I think it was, 5 said they were extremely bothered by suicidal thoughts, which is 5 more than you want. So now it's rare that a priest commits suicide, but it does happen, usually because of one of two different reasons. One, the most common one is a priest is accused of molesting minors, and that's when they're most vulnerable to taking their own lives. Or two, they have a lifelong history of depression, and it just wears them down. They just become suicidal. So either depression and or child abuse allegations. So I would say, again, not a huge issue, but an extremely important issue. If you've got one of those 5 priests, you want to know who that guy is, and you want to get him some help and keep him safe for sure. Now, one of the questions we're going to ask ourselves through this study will be, why is it that priests would score similarly or perhaps even a little bit better and more resilient than their lay counterparts in mental health? An interesting question. Now, another question which is related to it, people often say that priests are burned out. Priests are burned out. They're all burned out. I heard that recently. So we're all burned out. Well, is that true? Well, it's true. I think that most priests are overworked. And in fact, with the fewer priests and the increasing numbers of Catholics, the priests are overworked. I mean, in my parish, they just put out the new assignments, and several priests have picked up additional parishes. Some guys have at least 2, some have 3. One couple guys have 4 parishes they're responsible for, which is huge. So that's, the fact is a lot of them are overworked. But burnout and overwork are 2 different things. An overworked person can take a 2-week vacation, come back and feel very, very relaxed and ready to go. A burned out priest will not. He can take a 2-week vacation and come back, and he still wakes up in the morning feeling awful and really just kind of shot. So it's a different. Now there are some burned out priests, but the question is, as a group, and there's some reasons for it, as we've implied, that ministry is their long hours, their unsolvable needs, intense work, often unappreciated. There's this thing called compassion fatigue, which you've heard about, and this never-ending shaming in the media. So there's some reasons why people would say, I'm sure priests are burned out. Well, there's some reasons for it. But when you actually look at the numbers, it suggests that as a group, priests actually are not burned out. They're stressed and they're overworked, but they're not burned out. And by the way, the second one, burnout, these are not percentages. These are raw scores, and a raw score on that, what's called the Procol 5 here, below 22 is good. You're in the lower 25%. So priests as a group score actually pretty well on the burnout scale. And I gave them last time, 2009, the gold standard, the Maslach burnout inventory. And there, again, they scored very well. There are a very low percentage of priests are burned out, but there are some. But there are, of course, there are some. Now, now we're starting to get into it. The question is why. And when you find out why, you begin to realize what helps with resilience, number one, and number two, why priesthood does as well as it does do, and considering all the stress. I mean, if you took a normal organization and put it through what we've been through, the organization would have crumbled. And some media people said that, we pounded on Enron, whatever, and they fell apart. We pounded whatever, they fell apart. We pounded on the Catholic Church, and it's still standing. Why? How many priests did you know have left the priesthood in the last 15 years because of the abuse crisis, voluntarily? Said, I've had it with the church, I'm leaving because of this abuse crisis. How many left? I don't know any. I mean, they're upset about it, and they're stressed by it, and they're upset. They feel a bit beaten up, but they tend not to leave because of that. And the question is, what promotes resilience? Now, here, let's look at this. These are correlations on the right, by the way. The higher the number, the stronger the influence. So most people will say, how do we prevent burnout? I bet you've attended this workshop. Some psychologist came in and said, how do you prevent burnout? Well, we want you to exercise, we want you to eat right, we want you to take your day off, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what we tell our seminarians. All I can say is that's wrong. Those are good things to do. I want you to take your day off and exercise and eat right, but they're very minor contributors to resilience and not burning out. No. What are the real? Look at the ones that are the highest. First one, 0.72. That's a huge correlation. Overall happiness. What's the most important factor for not burning out? Liking what you do. If I like what I do, I'm not going to burn out because I like it. And the reality was in that earlier test of Protocol 5, priests like doing what priests do. Over 90% of priests say, I like doing what I do. I'm glad I chose it, and I'd do it again. And that's going to be key. It's going to be key. If you don't like what you do, and there's a lot of Americans who are in jobs that they don't like, and you can imagine I'm sure a lot of people in certain menial jobs are unhappy. You can kind of see it in their faces, they can't wait to get off. Priests are trying to squeeze in one more meeting, squeeze in one more person to see, squeeze in one more soul to touch, squeeze in maybe one more Bible study or something. They're trying, they feel motivated to do it. So liking what you do. Number two, self-esteem. To feel good about yourself. And interestingly enough, ministry lends itself to a very positive self-esteem. I mean, we feel good about ourselves by helping others. That's true of all helping professions, by the way. Anyone involved in ministry, healthcare, whatever, social work, whatever. There's a positive, buoyant feeling about self when you help others. You want to feel good about yourself? Help somebody else. Okay, other ones, like one's ministry, happy as a priest, relationship to the Lord, of course, with good friends. So, and then not being lonely, that's a negative correlation. So if we have good friendships, a good spiritual life, so the connections with God, connections with others, we're nourished. And that's what a priest does. He's nourished with his connection with the Lord, hopefully, and with their parishioners. One of the real traumas and many priests said it during the pandemic. He said, I'm cut off from the source of my support. I mean, all these people that I love in my parish, I can't talk to them. I can't see them. I feel this disconnected. So it was a trial. So anyway, now you see why priests are more resilient. Why? Because they have a spiritual life. They have friends. They have a job they like. They like doing what priests do. And so it nourishes them. It feeds them. So it's not surprising that happiness levels would be high among priests and that burnout levels would be low, even though people would sort of publicly think the opposite. Now, let's look at, again, these two crises and see what kind of effect this had on priests. Again, if you want to know how it's affected them, ask them. Ask them. People don't. People ask them. So has the COVID-19 pandemic been traumatic for you personally? So that's a very direct question. Traumatic, strong word, for you personally. 31% said yes, or they agree or strongly agree. That's a lot. About 1/3 of priests would say they were personally traumatized by the pandemic. Shouldn't ignore that. That is quite significant. I bet most Americans would say that, probably even more so. So that's something to think about. Our country has been traumatized, in the world has been traumatized by this pandemic. What are we doing to help our people continue to heal because of that? The abuse crisis have negatively affected my emotional well-being. 19% said yes. Now, that's not nothing, but interesting enough, it's lower than the pandemic. And what seemed to have happened was when the pandemic hit, the abuse crisis kind of went into the background and the pandemic kind of rose. And it'd be interesting now the pandemic is kind of slipping away, whether the abuse crisis kind of comes to the fore. Now, that's happening in some places already, like, for example, in Maryland, where they passed a look-back legislation, whatever, and the AG reports come out. Number 3, I felt overwhelmed by the pandemic and needed more support. Only 14%. Now that's more than zero, but most priests felt as though during the pandemic they were supported, presumably by the diocese as well as the state, but not all. Okay, we'll skip that one. Okay, now let's look at this question, another good one, an important one. In the wake of the abuse crisis, is morale among priests at an all-time low? I just read that in an article recently. This guy said, I know priests, that was his statement. I know a lot of priests, and I can tell you that the morale's at an all-time low. So is it true? You know, interesting enough, no numbers. He just said, you know, this is my impression. Well, I asked him. This is 2021. Overall, I'm happy as a priest. You've got 94% would agree or strongly agree. 94%. That's a lot. And my morale as a priest is good. You've got 88%. So what you're talking about, 88 to 94% of priests would say their morale is good and they're happy as priests. Now, it's not 100%. I've had a number of people get mad at me for this, say, oh, it's not true. I said, what? I didn't do it. I said, I gave it to you guys. You're the guys who said that. As a matter of fact, in one diocese I was there, I said, I'll tell you what. I said, I gave everybody a piece of paper. I said, I want to tell the truth. Are you happy as a priest? Yes or no? Do it confidentially, fold the piece of paper, stick it in the box, and I'll add them up. And I added up, sure enough, you know, I get about 90% were happy and about 10% weren't. You know, it's funny, you know, when I go from diocese, I've been to most dioceses in the country, and when you see groups of priests gathered, they look happy, they act happy, they say they're happy. So it's kind of like they say, well, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck and it says it's a duck, it's probably a duck. You know, if they say they're happy, they look happy and they act happy and they don't leave, you know, they probably are. Now, here's a very interesting factoid coming right now. It's very interesting. When you compare these numbers to 2004, 2009, look at the strongly agree category. In 2004, strongly agree was 39% that they're happy. 2009 is 42%. And then 2021, 55%. What does that tell you? It tells you that as a group, priests in the last 19 years are actually getting happier. The happiness level of priests is rising in last. Now, you might think I'm nuts with this, but actually my predecessor, God rest him, Dean Hoagie at Catholic University, he did these studies before me. I've kind of picked up his mantle. And he said the same thing. He said, you know, he's a layman professor, wonderful guy. And Dean said, you know, priesthood happiness levels are rising since about, you know, 70 or 80, 1970s, 1980s. So very interesting. They're rising. Not true in the general population. If you look at the studies of general happiness levels, to me, at least the ones I've looked at, they look like they're about stable or maybe even going down. So the interesting thing is priesthood happiness levels are going up and the laity are probably stable or maybe going down a little bit. Very interesting. Very interesting, you know. You know, Jesus said that my peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. that my joy might be yours and your joy might be full. Jesus promised us. He didn't say we're going to get rich, didn't say the world would love us, but he did promise us his joy and peace. And maybe we're seeing some of that. Anyone involved in following the Lord, I think that's one of the signs of a true disciple, is joy and peace, even in the midst of our struggles. But you got about 6% of priests who are unhappy or, you know, or waffling. Those thinking of leaving, there are some priests thinking of leaving, but it hovers about 3 to 5%. So you've got about 3 to 5% of priests who are thinking of leaving. Doesn't mean they're going to, but at least they're thinking of it. So you've always got some. And by the way, one of the strongest predictors of that is loneliness, isolation, and disconnection. And Dean found that. He said that, you know, it wasn't really celibacy, but the guys who left, he did a whole study on those who leave ministry. And he said he found that the ones who left priesthood felt lonely, isolated, and disconnected. Very interesting. Same thing in my study. Loneliness was a huge predictor of unhappiness and burnout. So very strong. So I would say that one of the things we need to really look at, and by the way, loneliness is rocketing up in society. If you look at the Cigna loneliness study done about 4 or 5 years ago, before the pandemic, they said loneliness among Americans was an epidemic. They use the word epidemic. About 40% of Americans have one or no friends, feel lonely, feel left out, and have no one to talk to. So it's huge, and it's devastating. Isolation is a killer, and it is among priests as well. If they're isolated and they feel unappreciated, they're going to think about leaving. By the way, my findings have been replicated again and again and again. So it's not just me, you know, NFPC study in 2001 said 94% of priests were happy. CARA found the same basic thing, 97% were very happy or pretty happy. You know, and now this is very interesting. This is the general social survey done by NORC in Chicago, and they looked at 27,000 Americans. And the group that was the happiest among all the groups in the US were clergy. Now, in this case, they would include Protestants and Catholics and religious women too. So that general ministerial crowd would be among the happiest people in the US. Very interesting, you know, that the sector, and if you stood up and said that though, if you want, you know, the happiest people in the country are priests and clergy, people would laugh at you. But that's what the numbers show. And that's numbers show. And by the way, Catholic priests measure very well when compared to Protestant clergy on these issues. And this was done in the UK. It's not just, this has been done in other countries too. And the UK did a study, the government did it, of 274 occupations. They found that, again, the happiest group were clergy. That included Protestants, Anglicans, and Catholics. And the second happiest group were chief executives. So think about that. Think about what a pastor is. He's a priest, and he's kind of a little bit of a CEO. You know, he kind of runs his little business there. And sometimes not little, some parishes are pretty big operations. So he's got number one, number two. Of course, I tell bishops, I said, you should be deliriously happy. You're a member of the clergy and you're definitely a CEO. So and they kind of laugh when I tell them that. So, and interestingly enough, the least happy group are bartenders. You know, it's interesting. And by the way, what the BBC did with this study was then they interviewed one guy who had been a bartender, became an Anglican clergy member, and asked him if he was happier. He said he was. There you go. So anyway, so the numbers showed again and again and again. It's a fact. Clergy tend to be very happy, and their burnout rates are low. The numbers show it again and again and again. You can't fight it. And everyone's study is the same. So the question comes is, what are the main ingredients? Now, this is a unique contribution that I did because I'm a stats geek. I basically put these numbers in the computer, and then I asked the computer to run these multiple regression equations, these correlations, and all that kind of stuff. And so I asked the computer, you predict to me, you tell me what are the main ingredients and what makes a happy priest. And these were the basic factors of my study. Now there are other. This is not all of them, because it didn't account for 100% of what we call the variance in the variable, but I think it was about 60% or so. So you've got these. You've got about 60% of what makes a happy priest, which is quite strong. Okay, so we're going to finish up about 5 minutes. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but I want you to just look at this group. For the first one, for example, the correlation is 0.69. That's very strong. Priests who feel good about themselves and a good sense of self-image and peace are much more likely to be happy as a priest, which makes sense, but it's important because most of the time, if you're unhappy in a certain type of career field or whatever you want to call vocation, if you move to another one, you might still be unhappy because you're bringing it with you. You know, compassion, satisfaction. That's, do you like doing what you do? Not depressed, not lonely, a relationship with the Lord. And by the way, the strongest predictor of inner peace was a good relationship with God. Not surprising. So if you have a good relationship with the Lord, you're more likely to have a sense of inner peace. That you had a good relationship with your bishop, that you felt good about your celibate life, the Eucharist was a strong part of your life, and all these kind of factors. So the reality is those priests and religious who felt good about themselves, liked ministry, had good friends, good relationships, good spiritual life, felt connected with the boss, and was living celibacy with some integrity and felt good about it, even though it was difficult. And there was a strong Eucharistic spirituality, and we're connected to other priests. We're going to be happy guys. And the reality is most priests are like that. You get about 90% of priests who say they have a good sense of self-image, good relationship with the Lord. The Eucharist is the center of their life. 94%. 94% of priests said that the Eucharist is the center of their lives. An incredibly strong number. And that's a very powerful spiritual statement by our priests. So reality is when you live priesthood well, as a celibate spiritual man, ministering to the people, connected to them, connected to your brothers, connected to the Lord, you're going to be a happy guy and you're not going to burn out. You're going to be stressed, you betcha. But it's going to be a fulfilling life, and for 90+% of our men, it is. So that's what I found. Lots more in the book, of course. And what I'll do now is, you're going to stop screen sharing, right?
Yes, I will.
Okay. So that was a snapshot of the book, and kind of encouraging, you know.
Most definitely, yes. Thank you so much, Monsignor. Very interesting, and I agree, encouraging, hopeful. And so I invite our attendees, this is your opportunity to ask Monsignor anything you'd like based on his presentation. So I invite you to send in questions now. As we're waiting for those questions to roll in, I was wondering if you could, your statement that those priests who are lonely or isolated or disconnected, right? That those are the big predictors of unhappiness.
Yeah.
What?
Right.
Yes, I've got it right here too. Uh, what can we do as a laity, or even those who work in parish ministry, to help priests in that area? Even though I know the number is small.
Well, I would say use your gifts. That's one thing I would say, is use your gifts. I mean, the parishes need people. I mean, as there's fewer and fewer priests, the laity really need to step up, and which they are. You know, we need deacons, we need lay ministers, we need religious women desperately. So these are all very important. So jump in there and promote vocations among your friends and kids, whatever, because it is a fulfilling life. Interesting enough, by the way, I was in a group of priests a while back, and I said, how many of you is your vocation to priesthood was strongly affected by a religious woman? I'd say about 80% of the guys, 80% of the guys raise their hands. You know, the decline in numbers of religious women are going to have an impact in our church, and in many different ways, and that's one of them.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
We need
Okay.
you. We need
Yes.
you.
Yes. Got some sisters on with us right now. I have a question here. Were the same priests polled in both years, or you had three? No.
No, it's different. Some same diocese, some different dioceses all over the U.S. and a whole bunch of different guys. So there's a different crowd, which is it's a good question because that gives the study even more strength.
Hmm.
You're not asking the same choir. You got a whole bunch of guys.
Yes. Let's see. Okay, here we go. How can parish priests and ministers help men who are discerning the priesthood in the parish?
Great question. Here, and I work quite a bit with seminarians. When I ask them what has influenced their vocation, I get about two or three things. One, of course, a real spiritual awakening. So I would say those retreats, all those things you bring the young people on, when they have an experience of the Lord in their lives, about 80% of them, priests would say, I've had some important experience. Secondly, getting to know priests and getting to realize that they're good guys, they're happy in their life, and here's what they do. They don't just say mass in the morning, go back to bed. I mean, there's a lot going on. So what? And then another thing, the third thing I would say would be World Youth Day and organizations like that. When I ask seminarians what influenced your vocation, many of them will say like World Youth Day. So those youth activities you bring them on. We have a place in Southern Maryland where every summer they have youth camp and they have college students sort of supervising middle school kids in a summer camp. It's a huge vocational thing. We get a lot of vocations from there. So getting the young people involved, getting those youth groups going, because their peers are isolated. So getting them involved with the Lord is a huge vocational thing.
Wonderful. Do you have any data or recommendations for how to help priests feel connected to their bishop?
I work on this a lot, actually. And the first thing I tell the bishops and dioceses, you need to have an annual convocation and go to it. That's very important. You can tell the difference. Gather as priests is not just a nice thing to do. It's part of who you are as a presbyterate. And so gather. And I tell seminarians, I said, if you don't go to these annual convocations when you're ordained, after I die, I'm going to haunt you. I want you to go. I want you to go to these things. It's very important to show up. So connect with your brothers with these convocations, with chrism masses, funerals of priests, ordinations. Go to those things. Connect with each other and connect with your bishop.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Another question here. Thank you so much. What are some strategies to get this message out there that overall our priests are happy? I think the messaging itself could work wonders. Also, how do you see the Eucharistic revival playing a role in boosting the dignity of the priesthood?
Two things I'd say. One is getting the word out. I talked to some priests and I said, how many of you at some point during your time as pastor have actually given a witness at as a homily about your life as a priest? And almost all of them have at some point. And I said, how'd it go? And they'll say things like, well, the people clapped. I mean, you don't want to do it every Sunday, but at least once. If you're a pastor of a parish and you're there for 6 years, at least once during those 6 years, tell people your homily from the pulpit and what it's been like for you as a priest. They will appreciate it. They will appreciate that, and they'll be touched and grateful. Okay, what was the second question?
The second part was the Eucharistic revival. How do you see the Eucharistic revival playing a role in boosting the dignity of the priesthood?
Absolutely. Well, John Paul II said there's no priesthood without the Eucharist and no Eucharist without the priesthood. And you see in my study, 94% of priests would endorse the statement, priesthood, Eucharist is the center of my life, the center of my life. So this Eucharistic revival is key. And by the way, many people find a complete regeneration of their spiritual life and actually vocational calling in Eucharistic adoration. I've seen it happen again and again and again. I encourage all of you to promote Eucharistic adoration. It's a powerful spiritual moment.
Yes. Do you see a disconnect between the way priesthood is presented to potential seminarians and the reality of being a priest? If so, how does a priest reconcile that incongruity?
Uh, I don't actually understand because I'm not familiar with it. I'm not, I see my own vocation directors, they seem to be presenting it okay. I don't know. I don't
Okay,
see a disconnect, but there might be, but I just don't, I'm not aware of it.
okay, okay. Um, what are your recommendations for reaching out to priests who are struggling with loneliness, depression, or anxiety?
Precisely, reaching out to them. I mean, lots of times we say, well, I don't want to bother them, but I would say, I would ask them, hey, John, how you doing? And especially one of their buddies, John, how you doing? We missed you. We had the convocation, we missed you. And then sometimes even the bishops say, just stopping by and saying we're concerned about you and want to help you. I just make the initiative, make the effort. And even if the person rebuffs you, at least they know that someone cares.
Yes. Another question, just curious, this attendee says, what do you think you would see in the data if you studied women's religious communities?
I have no idea. Although I would say, I mean, I'm just and I shouldn't do that study. Let some religious woman do it. I don't claim to be an expert on religious life, but the ones I see, I mean, just and I think they're great.
Mhm.
I would say the question of joy. I mean, that's one thing I see among religious women is just a sense of joy.
Mhm.
And I know a bunch of friends who are religious, and they're just joyful people. They put us to shame. I mean, we should smile as much as they do. So I would say to women who are thinking of a vocation as a sister, just look at their faces. I mean, you see, you see their lives. God, God's going to take care of you. You give yourself to the Lord. He'll going to take care of you.
Mhm. I would project that the results might be the same,
Mhm.
from your study, but it
Probably
would
better.
be
Probably,
interesting,
probably
or
better.
better. Yeah, yeah.
Probably better. Yeah.
All right. Here's another question. What support is being offered to priests to support them through this time of spiritual battle between good and evil in our world?
Well, one of my other jobs is I'm the diocesan exorcist,
Yes.
so I'm very much aware of that issue. I would say we need to do more. Here's one thing I would say. Seminarians get no training whatsoever in this. And so what happens is I get these panic phone calls, as you're ordained for a year. This person came into the parish and he said she's got demons and I don't know what to do. I said, and of course, everybody knows if you've got a problem with evil spirits, you talk to a Catholic priest. But the problem is we don't train them anyway. So I think we have to start
Mhm.
training people in what to do. Now, we do have a website called CatholicExorcism.org, CatholicExorcism.org. And on there's a 10 video training series on deliverance work. So, and the password St. Michael, by the way, is a password. But ST Michael. But I'd say training. I think they need to understand how to help their people. But the most important thing I would say is you're on the winning team. Jesus won the battle. He's already
Mm.
won the battle. We should have great confidence, that Satan's dust compared to Jesus. Jesus won. Our team won.
Mhm.
Be confident.
Love it. What's the mental status of retired priests? Do you have anything
Oh,
to
you're
say
gonna love
about that?
this. I tell priests, I said, then I compared the happiness levels of young priests, middle-aged priests, and oldest priests. I said, do you know who the happiest priests were? The retired
Retired
priests.
ones.
Everybody laughed. You say, well, but actually that's important. Could you imagine if the retired priests were less happy, unhappy? What a terrible witness that would be.
Mhm.
You know, what that tells us is that a life of service as priest leads to a happy person. And so the numbers show it.
Mhm. Wonderful. Monsignor, this has just been so enlightening and interesting and enjoyable. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. We Really, really appreciate it. And for all of our attendees, we offer you 25% off of um, all four of Monsignor's books, and they are all here. Webinar 0509 is your code when ordering at AveMariaPress.com. Do you want to say anything about any of these books or your current
Well, I
one?
just want to thank everyone. All of you are involved in ministry in some way. So God bless you and thank you for all you do. May the Holy Spirit continue to guide you and lead you. So
Oh, thank you so much. This webinar, again, is being recorded. I will send you all an email tomorrow with the link to the recording. And this is a great way to end our spring series. This is the last one until after Labor Day. So we'll start up our fall series in September, and enjoy your summer break. And you can always contact me if you have any interest in topics or presenters. I always love to get any feedback and input from all of you. So thank you so much. Again, thank you, Monsignor. Everybody have a great day.
may God bless us all, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.